So good afternoon. This is Claudia Filos. I am with the Center for Atlantic Studies remotely. The center is located in Washington, D.C., and we're here today to have a conversation with classicist Douglas Frame. And we have many members of our community, many cherished and wonderful members of our community here. So, Doug, we just want to first start off by introducing you and just say thank you so much for taking your time for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Real pleasure to be here. I look forward to it.
Great. And so, Doug, you have some books and articles that you have written, and we have shared those through a post at the Hour 25 site that members of our community may have started to access. And also, you have looked at some of the questions in our discussion forum that were left for you. And I know one of the questions that you were interested in perhaps starting with was a question that Janet had. So, Janet, would you like to give Doug a question? Can you remember what you wrote? Or
I can focus Janet's question a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
You referred to Nestor as the glue between the Iliad and the Odyssey. Or you asked if that was a good way to look at Nestor. So that's what I was picking up on a little bit there. But Janet, go ahead and you ask the question. But that's the part that I had in mind.
Okay,
I'm sure glue is the best way to let everybody else know what we're talking about.
Okay. If I remember correctly, I asked Nestor and Odysseus and Menelaus are the three figures who are in both epics, and but Nestor has a special role, very active role in both of them. I said I was wondering if he is the glue for both epics, and what does it? Please go ahead first.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, no, that's you said it perfectly. I have my answer sort of thought out for that. I mean, the question really has to do with the relationship between the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? That I think that's a very good thing to think about. I mean, it's not that they were the first ones to think about it either. This has been thought about for a very long time. But I don't know, in the course of my work, I've just reached the point where, to me, the two poems belong together. I think that they were actually created together, composed together, and they were meant to be experienced together, sequentially, one after the other. So that's the point at which I've arrived. One way that you can well, one sign, let's say, that this is the case, that actually it's one long poem, the Iliad and the Odyssey, is that they don't repeat each other. They don't overlap. The episodes that the Odyssey refers to that took place during the Trojan War aren't things that you learned about in the Iliad. This is, for example, the stories that Helen and Menelaus tell about Odysseus. Right, in Book 4 of the Odyssey. There's nothing, all of that is, the poems are conscious of each other. That's what I'm trying to say, is that the way a novel would, you'd be very careful not to say exactly the same thing, you wouldn't want that. So this complementary distribution of material, just to use a fancy term for it, is one sign of this relationship between the two poems. But then the question that you asked, Janet, about the figures that you have in both poems. So the two heroes, right, and Achilles, they're in both poems. As minor figures to some extent, each in the other's poem, but Odysseus is an important figure in the Iliad, and Achilles appears in the Odyssey, in the underworld, and has something important to say, about remaining alive versus being in the underworld. Who else? Janet, you mentioned Menelaus. Yes, as well as Nestor. Now that's a good one to compare with Nestor. Why is Nestor any more significant than Menelaus? They each have a book in the Odyssey. They're both uh, not the main figure, but prominent figures in the Iliad. And to that extent, I think you know our initial reaction is that they're about the same. So I'm going to make the case that Nestor is a bigger figure than that, and this has to do with sort of his hidden myth. Yeah. That Nestor has a myth that is never really revealed in either poem, and you have to be aware of this myth to really see what his role in the two poems is. And the way you get at this myth, or the way I got at it, or it got at me, was through an Indo-European comparison, which struck me at a certain point. And then this had to do with the Indo-European twin myth, and the title of the book that I wrote on this subject kind of captures that Indo-European myth, which is the horseman Nestor, Hippota Nestor, where the horseman is one twin and the Nestor figure is the other twin. And these twins in the Indo-European form of the myth interact with each other. One is mortal and dies. The other is immortal and brings his mortal brother back to life. And it just so happens that in Greek, this myth is perfectly preserved in the Dioscuri. This is Castor and Pollux. Castor dies, Polydeuces brings him back to life. Well, in the case of Nestor, he's got both parts. He is both the, so to speak, the immortal twin and the mortal twin at the same time. So his myth is not that he brings his mortal brother back to life. He actually has a mortal brother. His name is Periclymenos, great warrior who died. Heracles killed him, and we can talk more about that maybe a little bit later. But the point of Nestor's myth is that he doesn't bring the warrior back to life. He takes the warrior's place, and that's how he becomes the horseman, Hippota Nestor. Mm-hmm. So it's in that context that, well, which context? This is now his role in the Iliad. It has to do with Patroclus, Achilles and Patroclus. That this myth that is never really revealed is all but revealed in his interaction with Patroclus. And I think that I'm going to just leave it there. That has two parts. He is the one that instigates Patroclus to take the place of Achilles. And this is based on his own myth, where he took the place of his warrior brother. But then Patroclus died, and in his funeral games, Nestor again plays an important role. That he introduces the chariot race, and that chariot race again has to do with Patroclus. This gets hard to talk about because it's the hidden myth. It's the absent signifier, and I don't know whether I can really make that clear. But Janet, this was an attempt to at your question.
Thank you.
Right. So that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Can I just ask, is it okay, can we see if some members of our audience who are watching live might like to give a question right now?
Please.
Okay, so if anyone's listening right now and they would like to submit a question, you can do that via the Google Plus events page. And there are instructions. Oh, here we go. We have some questions. So, okay, so we have a couple of very specific questions coming in. Okay. Okay, so they're coming in. They're sort of coming in serialized. In 1 second, so it's going to take me a second to read through these. So, can we first take one question from someone in our group here who is visible? So Sarah has a question. Thanks.
Yes, I'd been reading in the paper about Achilles and Patroclus, where you were talking about the twins and the immortal twin and the mortal twin, and that one of them would be associated with cattle, and the other one would have the epithet breaker of horses, which jumped out at me because that's the epithet applied to Hector. So does he have some sort of absent twin, or is he both twins at once, like you were describing Nestor? What do you think?
Oh, that's an interesting question. You know, he does sort of have a twin myth, but it's not with it's not with one of his brothers. I mean, he has lots of brothers, right? Priam had lots of sons.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the numbers at 50. Or at any rate, Polydamas is how it sounds in Greek. Polydamas and Hector were born on the same night. Now this sounds like twins, right? They actually says this in the Iliad somewhere. And this Polydamas is sort of the advisor to Patroclus. Oddly enough, he's always trying to restrain I'm sorry, if I'm saying Patroclus, I mean Hector. He's always trying to restrain Hector from doing something rash. So they're very much a pair of twins. One is the advisor, and the other, Hector, is the definitely the warrior. He's not only a breaker of horses, but his very name is well, the defender. He's the defender of his city. So yes, I mean there's a twin myth there, but well, this is the interesting thing about twin mythology is that they don't actually have to be called twins. They can just be a pair. This often happens with a pair of brothers that fit the category of twins in every way, except they're not called twins. Well, let me think of an example. I can't think of a very good. Well, Agamemnon and Menelaus are like this too. Agamemnon and Menelaus. I'll be brief on this, but okay. You have the Dioscuri. They are the twins. They have a sister, Helen, right? Well, this same sister, Helen, relates to Agamemnon and Menelaus. Menelaus marries Helen, and Agamemnon woos Helen for Menelaus. In Indo-European, yeah. Okay.
So Doug, one of our members of our community, Renan, is asking you to talk about Nestor's cup and the way that it's helping us understand perhaps the spread of the Homeric poems. Is that something you might be able to discuss?
Briefly, it's a kind of a complicated. This is an archaeological object that was found on the island of Ischia, off the Bay of Naples, in the Bay of Naples. In ancient times, it was called Pithekusai, and it was colonized by Greeks from the island of Euboea early, and a cup was found there. Forgotten exactly when, within the last century sometime, and there's an inscription on it. The cup itself, let me continue with this. The cup itself doesn't look like much, and we call it Nestor's cup. There's a little conflict there because Nestor has a famous cup in the Iliad, which is very, very fancy. This is in Iliad 11, where he prepares the elixir to cure the wounded warrior that he's brought back from the battlefield. This is the Nestor's cup that is famous from Homer, from the Iliad. Now we go back to Pithekusai, just about 700 BC. Somebody inscribed on this not very elaborate cup, just a clay skufos it's called, an inscription which goes something like this: Nestor's cup is good to drink from, but whoever drinks from this cup immediately the desire of golden Aphrodite will seize him. Okay, so that's the Nestor's Cup inscription, and what it indicates to me, and this is controversial, there's a little bit in the inscription that has to be filled in, so even the meaning I just read to you, not everybody would go along with, but what it indicates to me is that the Homeric poems were already known in the West at the time of this date, like 700 BC, or at least this aspect of the Homeric poems. I don't think that the Homeric poems themselves were widely known outside of Ionia. This is the coast of Asia Minor. But these people from Euboea spoke the same dialect as the Ionians in Asia Minor. And somehow they're aware, at least of this episode from the Iliad. Sorry, I'm long-winded here, but that's my answer.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And so, unfortunately, can we? I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty seeing the next questions. So it'd be great actually if someone in the room could ask a question. And I actually can't see anyone's picture at the moment. So if you could...
Bill.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Jackie.
Yeah, this is Bill again. Yeah, I was asking about the hymn to Apollo and the significance of including the myth about Telphusa, the spring nearby.
Oh, let me try that one. Yes, I saw your question, Bill. And this is the hymn to Apollo. I'm not sure that I have an interesting picture on my screen at the moment. I'm not quite sure what's happening. Can you all still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. If you've read the hymn to Apollo, this is Apollo founding his oracle at Delphi. And he has to take a long trip from Mount Olympus. And we find out just exactly what his route was, all the way from Mount Olympus in the north to Delphi in the center of Greece. So this is about geography, a lot of this hymn. And one of the last places he passes Apollo before he gets to Delphi is Telphusa. There's a nymph there. And he's about to found his oracle in Telphusa. And the nymph convinces him not to found it there because there's a lot of noise from the chariot races held for Poseidon in a nearby Onchesmus is the name. So he moves on and he keeps going to Delphi and he founds his oracle there. Exactly the same language is repeated when he founds the oracle at Delphi as when he was thinking of founding it Telphusa. And then after he founds the oracle, first oracle for Apollo is Delphi. That's the important thing. He remembers, aha, that nymph Telphusa deceived me. So he goes back, he covers over the river, the nymph is a spring, and founds his oracle there. So he has his revenge. What all of this says, I think, Bill, is that Delphi is the first oracle of Apollo. And that's the point of the hymn to Apollo, is to it's from the point of view of Delphi. So Delphi is number one, Telphusa is number two. The nymph was deceitful. She got what was coming to her, and Apollo got his oracle there as well. Okay.
Thank you very much. I like that perspective. It kind of makes sense.
That's how I view it. That it's a very Delphic-centric hymn. I'll say just another word about that. This shouldn't be so much about the hymn to Apollo, maybe, but okay, Delphi is the center. In terms of the geography, you have Apollo coming from this is the northeast down to the center. This is Delphi. Then he needs priests for his oracle. They come in exactly the opposite direction from the south, up through the southwest to the same point. These are the Cretan sailors, that if you know the hymn, Apollo turns himself into a dolphin, lands on the ship, commandeers it. These are the priests. They thought they were going to do some trading in Pylos, but no, they end up as priests. So anyway, Delphi is the center. I have well, I don't want to interrupt if other people have questions, but I have one that I'm going to
Sure. Thank you, Doug.
suggest.
That would be wonderful. That would be great.
Shall I do that?
That would be great. And I actually, that glitch seems to be solved, but I don't think I will be clicking on any more questions, the Q&A at the moment. Okay, so.
Well, let me wait then, because let's see what.
Oh no! I think I love what I'm saying is we're not going to be using the automated Q&A feature right now in the live hangout, because before when I clicked on that it caused a technical problem. So if people are listening, I'm not sure I'll be able to get to all those questions. We'll see how it goes.
Oh, okay.
So we'd love to hear what you wanted to talk about right then.
This is a question from Tritoganea, which is a great name, right?
Yes.
This is a name of Athena in Homer, and it turns out Tritoganea is actually, I think, Laura Ford from Lynchburg, Virginia.
Yes. Very active member of our community.
Well, that's very interesting for me to know. I probably shouldn't be saying this quite so publicly, but I think Laura and I interacted earlier on the Homer Multitext website. Yeah, okay.
Lovely.
Yeah. She asked a very interesting question, which she then withdrew, so I never had a chance to answer it. But anyway, she was asking about Nestor being unlike other old men in their grief. That Priam, is a figure of grief because of Hector and because of the fall of Troy, basically, right? And Laertes, right? He's covered in dirt and worse, in his grief because of Odysseus returning. And Peleus, right? We don't see him firsthand, but we know that he also is a figure of grief because Achilles isn't going to return. So Laura's question had to do with Nestor and Antilochus. Does he really mourn Antilochus? And she was making the case that he really doesn't, that it's more Pisistratus, the brother, right, in the Odyssey, who grieves for Antilochus when they talk about the Trojan War. The one thing I wanted to say, just to qualify that a little bit, is that Nestor does start his account to Telemachus in Book 3 of the Odyssey with grief. He says that, oh, you're reminding me of all the time we spent there. It would take me years to tell you the woes that we suffered there, all the great men who died, the heroes who died. And then he lists a few. But the one he ends with is Antilochus. And he says, and Antilochus. So in general, I agree that it's true that this doesn't get a lot of attention. Nestor has many other, I won't say more interesting, but well, to me they are more interesting. Things, his hidden myth and so on. All these things are going on with him that don't go on with the other figures so much. Or the other figures, the interest that they have is in their grief. Priam is the main example of that, right? 24 of the Iliad, all about Priam's overcoming his grief on this trip. With Nestor, there's just too many other factors going on. So yes, there's grief for that. The interesting thing to me now, this gets into a little bit of, well, we'll see what it gets into. But so the way Nestor is remembered, subsequently, we're talking about reception now, is not for hidden myth and things like that, because that's more or less all forgotten. I mean, Nestor is on the same plane with everybody else in subsequent tradition. What he's remembered for is overliving, it's called. This is what in Juvenal, for example, and I've forgotten what the other famous source is. He is the example of living too long. And the reason he lived too long is that he's seen the death of Antilochus. And this is what he's famous for. He's famous for overliving. So that just shows you the difference between, and from my perspective anyway, what the figure was initially in the Homeric poems, and then how he was viewed later. Okay.
So, but
yeah.
that raises that idea of the absent signifier, and I know you don't want to get into it too much, but there was a question too about in the Iliad, the place where Nestor's talking about the turning post, right? And there's sometimes ambiguity about what it is, right? What it was made out of, who it's for, what the message is. I mean, do you see that those things are part and parcel of the same issue?
Yeah, there was a question about that.
I think that was Jackie's question.
Jackie's
right? Jackie asked about that.
Yeah.
Look in the pine.
As you read, Doug, it seems, unbelievable that he would not know, a man of his intelligence and experience would not know the difference between oak and pine, so there's something else obviously going on. And I just thought it was wily Nestor who survived this long, who's able to kind of tap dance between not offending the different gods, and that's what I had interpreted as, but it was a question that continually came up in Heroes X, and I thought, well, you would know.
It seriously did. Why Nestor, when he refers to the tree stump, this is the first post, says that it's either an oak or a pine, right?
People are very interested in that, actually. And so it really makes me think about the way you're thinking about Nestor, right? So much is unsaid, so much is unclear.
Well, this question never occurred to me. So let me try to improvise a little bit. Well, let me ask you a question first. So the way you were taking it was that, Zeus and Poseidon both figure in the chariot race because they were the teachers of Antilochus. Nestor actually says so in the speech at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. And so your thought is that the oak tree is Zeus. Good. I mean, this is right. This is Dodona and, the Zeus's oracle there, which came through the oak trees and whatnot. But my question was about Poseidon. I can't connect Poseidon with the pine tree. Can you?
Well, it just in brief research. The other thought was that it was associated with Dionysus, and then he's talking about perhaps, Cleo's cult glory versus mortal and immortal. So that would, which do you want to go for? That was the other thought that came to mind, but the opening sentences kind of pushed me towards Poseidon. So, but what do you think?
Oh well, when you say Dionysus, it makes me think of the Bacchae. The pine, isn't it a pine tree there that? When they're in the mountains, that. Well, I can't remember it very well, but anyway. Say it again.
I say the mountain when they're going up the mountain there. I think there is some mention of a pine tree.
I think so too. Yes, and who is it that appears in the pine tree? This is when. No, I can't be specific. Okay. I'm not sure.
But what we're talking about, I think, does raise a question about signs, right? And can you talk a little bit about the connection between Nestor and signs? And does that go back to basically the root of his name? Yeah,
and signs.
Signs, as an asema, right? As an asema, which is sort of what we're talking about now with the turning post. Okay. What is the association between Nestor and semas and signs?
Maybe I should just back up a little on the, the whole chariot race. because to me this is the. By the way, the term absent signifier is not one that I used in the book at all.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of came up at a conference last summer where it turned out to be a very useful term for the kind of the things that I've talked about in my book, and then other examples were discussed as well. That this happens all the time in Homeric poetry. That I'm going to be very abstract for the moment, but just in linguistics, you have something called sign zero, which functions just like other signs. I mean, in the linguistic system, and so that's the idea of the absent signifier. Just the fact that it isn't mentioned doesn't mean that it isn't there. Another way to think about it is it's the elephant in the room, right? That what everybody knows is the case, but nobody talks about. So in the case of Iliad 23, I kind of got into this a little bit earlier, and then I didn't want to go too much further with it, but I'll go a little further with it now. This is Patroclus again, right? Patroclus took the place of Achilles, same way that Nestor took the place of his brother, became the warrior. But the difference is that Nestor got away with it, through 3 generations, and Patroclus didn't. So that it's Iliad 23 that takes account of that. And that's why Nestor is there in the chariot race. Mm-hmm. The chariot race has lots of associations with homecoming and all sorts of other things, but the main thing is that this chariot race does, is to recreate Nestor's myth, part of it, the part where he didn't succeed, before he became a horseman. And what happened then? Well, he tells it very briefly at the end. Achilles gives him a special prize, right? That you can't compete, Nestor, you're too old. Oh, but yes, I did compete back when, and I won every contest except one. Well, which one did he lose? The chariot race. Now that's just outrageous. The horseman Nestor won everything except the chariot race. And he has this whole long speech at the beginning of the episode advising Antilochus how to round the turning post. And he actually says, well, I don't need to do this because you know all this already. Poseidon, Zeus and Poseidon were your instructors. So why does he tell it? Well, it's what Claudia is asking me here. It has to do with drawing attention to what's called the sema, the sign. Sema can be a tomb, it can be a sign, it can be a landmark. And in this case, I think it's the landmark. And he warns, he gets all this detailed instruction to Antilochus. And then the race takes place. The instruction all has to do with the proper way to get around the turning post. The race takes place, and the turning post just disappears. It's not even mentioned in the race. You expect it to come at a certain point, and it's not even mentioned. From one line to the next, you're already past it, and everything develops from that point on. There's the absent signifier, the absent sign, just to use that term.
Because the turn is actually the most dangerous and the most critical moment. That's sort of, in Hero's Acts, that's sort of the conversation we were having with Professor Naj. That's the critical moment.
That's the critical moment. Excuse me. Critical moment here, too.
Yes, of course. We'll make it fast a turn, don't worry. And so
let me get to it, because I know where you're heading, I think. So when Nestor says that I won every contest except the chariot race, he goes on to say, and I lost that race to a pair of twins. And he doesn't say how he lost it. From his point of view, he says what the twins had, how they won it. And the way they won it was because they each had a different function. One of them used the whip, and the other held the reins. And the line that says that he steadily held the reins, this is the other one, he steadily held the reins, it's repeated like from the end of one line to the beginning of the next line. This is going around the turning post, just iconically in the language. He steadily held the reins, pause, he steadily held the reins, he's made it around. Now you just take the reverse image of that for Nestor, what he lacks at this point. He's not a horseman. He doesn't steadily hold the reins. You actually have a description of what happened to him in the race. It's the character whose prize he gets at the end, Eumelus, crashes in the race. And there's a description not of what happened to him, because that has to do with the gods interfering in the race, but what one of the spectators who couldn't see what was happening speculates about what was happening. He must have crashed at the turn. He must have been using the reins as a whip. And he lost control of the reins and off the end of the course. That's the description of Nestor. Thank you, Claudia. You made me say it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just think it's so important in terms of your argument, and it's so important in terms of just our work in Heroes X and Hour 25. That moment is so significant, right? So the more we talk about it, I think the more we understand it.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's the absent signifier is not an idea that makes a lot of people, some people, very happy. Mm-hmm. The context where we used this stuff a lot last year involved Homerists. Some of us were there, as Homerists, and then a wider assortment of classicists, historians of religion, historians generally, who have their Homer, their idea of Homer. And then you introduce the idea that don't take it at face value. You have to think about absent signifiers. They just throw up their hands. I mean, this is how can we deal with that?
Right. Okay.
Well, one way to deal with it is at least to start the conversation about, this is what we see. Maybe you've got to start looking at it a little bit differently anyway.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful approach. So, Jack, I know you had a message up earlier, a hand up earlier. Did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I have a few. Doug, that you've written such fantastic books and articles that it's amazing what you put together on these huge puzzles. I had a couple. If I could ask a couple of little questions. I know you have a note on this in Nestor, but I just saw the electronic version and I couldn't find the note. But what do you make of the Garanius part of this epithet as compared with other heroes who are Garon Hepalita, Ainus or Pelus, and Garanius, shows up in the same part of the verse. Even Nestor shows up at the beginning of the verse, but it just seems to be a placeholder, and I think even ancient sources were arguing about what does this really mean, and they thought that to say that he spent some time with the king in Garania, Garanian, was just something to try to deal with it, but it's maybe a long form of Garo, which we see in other standing formulas. But what do you think it points to?
Well, I'll tell you what I think it points to. And you're right. There is no certain answer. I don't think it was understood. Well, I don't know about Homeric times, but it come down to Hesiod a little bit later, right? Subsequent to Homeric poems. That's in the catalogs. That's where you get Gerania, a place where, according to the Hesiodic catalog, Nestor was brought up. You know, in Iliad 11, why does he survive when Heracles kills all the other brothers? It's because, this is according to Hesiod now, he wasn't even there. He wasn't in Pylos. He was away in Gerania, being brought up separately. And then he returns once he's sold it. This is Hesiod. Okay, my note on this, it's not just Geron, but also Geros, which is the honor, which is due in old man. I think that's probably what the Gerenios has to do with. There is an unpublished article. I think I refer to it in that note that kind of convinced me that that's the case. This is very early in Hippo to Nestor, if anybody's interested in looking at it. And the reason I footnoted that so early is the title of my book. If you're familiar with the Homeric poems of the Greek, you say, well, there's something missing here. It's not just Hippo to Nestor, it's Gerenios Hippo to Nestor. And I do point out that there is one occasion where it's just Hippo to Nestor. So I guess that's my justification for the title. But what's interesting is that being an old horseman like Nestor, Hippo to Nestor, that's not inherent, his being old, in that formula. But other old men then get it as well. Peleus gets it, Hippo to Peleus. Who are the other ones? I can't think at the moment, but there are about 3 or 4 who are all old men. Sorry? But let me...
Oinus.
That's it. Hippo to Oinus is one. There's a famous one that I'm not getting. Oh, it's Tydeus. It's Diomedes' father. Hippo to Tydeus. To me, having the extra element, the Gerenios, shows you where it started. It started with Nestor, this Hippota, Gerenios Hippota Nestor, and then the Hippota part can apply to other old men. Does that make sense? I'm not explaining it as I would like, but
well, it makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's a plausible theory at any rate, and there's just so much. There's so many coincidences in the formulae applied to different heroes that you feel like there's something that you can just reach out and understand if you just knew a little bit more.
You know, you mentioned the Geron Hippalata Nestor, which is the same Gerenios Hippota Nestor, Geron Hippalata Nestor. There it is, old man. That is a pretty strong indication that Gerenios is also somehow or other associated with old man. But again, I think it's the honor. The idea is the honor.
Yeah, but Geros is too.
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's also associated with old age. Okay. Well, I think we kicked that one around pretty well.
Well, one other thing that I noticed is, even though Nestor complains a lot about, being weak because of his age, like he didn't kill 100 charioteers in one day as an old man. But you see him taking Machaon out of the fight on his chariot, and you see him raising a mug that most younger men can't raise. So, I mean, on the objective standards, it looks to me as if Nestor is still very much full of fire in the belly.
Hey, he's still in the fight. He's still there. He does, as you say, he really can't take on all the younger warriors. He has 2. He rescues Machaon, but he's been in the fight, and the other one is where he's in trouble, where his horse gets shot. right?
Yeah.
And that all has to do with Antilochus again, because that's a duplication of the scene later where Antilochus is killed. You know, that's where Antilochus dies. We're talking about grief before. Think of the grief for Nestor. His son not only dies, his son dies trying to save Nestor. Actually, save. Yeah.
In front of him.
Yeah. But anyway, it's the second Horseman episode in the present form. Yeah.
Just one more, if I may, and that is, may I quote you using for that term absent signifier, because I find it so useful as a way of pointing to things like in intertextual situations where, you know, the later poet will take up part of a Homeric or an Euripidean quote, but not do the whole thing. But the other part is like the elephant in the room.
Yeah, well, yeah, you may certainly refer to me. It was actually Leonard Milner who used the term at this conference in Paris last summer. Supposedly and then I picked it up and I started using it all over the place. I thought it was so good. But,
I used it too in Heroes X because it was just was just such a natural. So it belongs up there with Preamble and some other mainstays of the philologist stock and trade, I think.
Well, at some point they're going to publish the what we did in Paris last summer, and you can actually get it out of Lenny's paper. Lenny's known to everybody here, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay.
Great. Thanks, Doug.
Oh, thank you, Jack. Yes.
You just mute just briefly, actually. I'm having trouble with the control, so if you could do that, I think that would be helpful.
Sounds like a dog barking there.
I think so. Yeah, he's a wonderful dog. Okay, so you know what we could do is we can link to that conference. We could link to that conference on the Hour 25 website. Okay, so that everyone can find those papers.
It's not up yet. Oh, it's not there.
Oh, nothing is there yet?
No, but supposedly it's coming.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know when.
Okay, I think, do you have time for one more question? I know Sarah had a question, I think, even from another participant.
Sure. No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. This question's from Brian Prescott-Dessier, who's not able to come into the chat today. He's stuck in a meeting. But he's asking about your paper, New Light on the Homeric Question, the Phaeacians Unmasked, and the relationship between Phaeacia and Panaionia, the Codrid myth and Athena, but only briefly of Poseidon. And he appears in your paper in the comparison of Ionian, Phaeacian, and Nestor's genealogies, and then again with the prophecy of the mountain and the destruction of the ship at the critical moment of Odysseus' awakening, but hardly at all in between. And then there's a footnote about the festival of Miletus, dedicated to Poseidon. So he's asking two questions. If Odysseus had competed formally in the games and won, would he as a victor have had to offer a sacrifice to Poseidon, which would presumably have been a miasma? And what is the relationship of the Ionians and Phaeacians? Why is it so ambivalent to Poseidon?
That's a hard question. I'm not sure that I have too much to offer on that. There was another question actually up before asking about. Let me just take
yes, please take a moment. Yes, and of course, I mean, we can always follow up on any of these questions in our discussion forum as well. If there's something you want to take time to think about, those are very specific questions. So.
Okay, just a second, because it does remind me of.
Yeah, I think I asked something.
Well, if I may I just comment? Yeah. I think your handling of the two pilots is just absolutely stunning.
The which now, Jack?
Stunningly brilliant.
The which?
Well, you know, there's Messenian Palace.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Palace, and there is, I guess, a little palace there up near Olympia,
Yes.
near Alpheus.
Yes.
And it, you know, I think you took on a huge puzzle there, and your solution makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, thank you.
Doug, I know we don't have a lot of time, but if you could just take, is there a way to summarize that quickly, or is it best just to point people to the paper? Is there a way to do that, you think?
Yeah, I can do that. I think there is a paper that I did for a conference 5 years ago. That's not the title of it, but something, it's the Homeric poems after Ionia, point, which kind of goes through the Pylos question. Can I say why the Pylos was important to me, though, that question? It's because of the Nestor story in Iliad 11, which is the basic story for Nestor. This is where he becomes the horseman, right? His father takes his horses away from him.
Right.
He goes out on foot anyway. He captures a chariot. He conquers 50 chariots, double occupants of 50 chariots, turns around and comes home. This whole thing is like a chariot race. I mean, it's. I always think of the French comic book figure Asterix, that Nestor in his youth was like that. He could do anything. I mean, conquering 50 chariots, and this is two warriors in each chariot, all in one afternoon. And this is starting from Pylos, wherever that is, going all the way past the enemy city. This would take a week to do what he's talking about, right? So that's the essence of the story, and that's to get the myth. You've got to see it in those terms. It's mythical, but then you get these geographical references, detailed geographical references in the story that just interrupt all of that. A river is put in there, the Alpheus River, which is what's near Olympia. And they had stopped there, and they camp for the night, and they start the next morning. And the whole thing has been made realistic by giving Pylos a very specific location that is realistic. And it's not where we know Bronze Age Pylos was. It's much closer together with the end point. Anyway, it's that's what drove me to think about this. Is where did this second layer come from? And I'm not the one that identified the second layer. That was identified by a Swiss scholar, years ago. I can tell you how many years ago, because it's my age. It was done in. Well, we won't go into that. So anyway. He was right. Cantieni is the name of the Swiss scholar. He, in my opinion, nailed it. But then it was just a question of identifying when, though, it would make sense to see the addition or that second layer to the story. What circumstances would explain that? And I'm pretty radical about that. I say it's 5th century, that even as late as the 5th century in Athens, under very special circumstances, you could get a new version of something like that story. That's pretty late for that to happen, but that's the argument. Did I do it?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So, Doug, it's we're coming up on 3 o'clock. So, at this point, I just want to thank you and thank everyone for coming here. I want to thank all the people who are watching online and who submitted questions. Next time, hopefully, we can work out just those few little glitches we were having with the Q&A, and we'll be able to take some more questions. But it's been so helpful to hear you talk about these things. It's so much better than, I love reading your papers, reading your books. They're beautiful. All of them are available online at CHS, but it's not the same as talking with you.
It was such an honor to be here, and I can tell that it's a work in progress. It was just fun. I mean,
great.
Thank you.
Oh, good.
Good to see you all.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the broadcast right now. If everyone can stay here for 1 second, okay?